This is Tony from Historic American Homes. We're back for part two of our small modern house. In this part, we're going to confirm that we're satisfied with the plans by arranging furniture. We're going to work on the fireplace and give some preliminary thoughts to the roof framing and window walls. Well, we're back for part two here of our small modern house. I've had a couple of thoughts since I've been away from it for half a day. First of all, I'm going to show you a little change I've made. I've pulled this front wall out, this entry wall. I've pulled it forward 2 feet, and I've also moved this corner here over about 6 feet. So this part is not as wide as it was, and then this section on this side, which is going to get glassed in, is a little wider, and I think overall that's going to look a lot nicer. By pulling it forward 2 feet, I gained 2 feet in this corridor, which allowed me to put some storage along one side and expand the smaller bedroom by 2 feet. So that gave that bedroom a little more space. Something else that I thought about is you will notice, first of all, I've dropped a bunch of furniture in here. I always like to design with furniture. Now, it's not intended to be an interior design per se, but the idea is to make sure that I'm arranging spaces so that there are good potential furniture arrangements available for however people want to use the spaces. I haven't created circulation problems, for example, or for example in a bedroom, I like to have 2 windows on 2 different walls in a bedroom that makes much nicer natural lighting, and at the same time I also like to have, well, you've got to have at least one wall with a wide enough section for a bed and a side table to go next to it, preferably 2 walls so that people have a choice as to how they want to arrange the bedroom. So for example, in this bedroom, the headboard could go against this wall, or it could go against the wall to the left, or possibly even against this wall between these 2 windows. So I do put furniture in my designs from the start. I have a SketchUp file that's just full of furniture, and I grab the pieces I think I'm going to want and drop them in. Now, on the subject of furniture and dining, I had originally expected this island to be large enough that I could bring stools up around it. So I had let it extend over a foot beyond where it would need to go in order to accommodate stools. And in a larger house where you're going to have that, it can be a nice arrangement in a larger house to have that kind of an island. But when I do, I still like to have a proper dining area with normal height dining chairs at a dining table. When I do dining at a counter, you need to use stools rather than normal height dining chairs. So I decided that given that this is a small house, that kind of redundancy didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to have both an island with stools and try to fit in a dining table and dining chairs. So this is a change I'm going to make. I'm going to reduce the size of that island a little bit, and then as a kind of, not a compromise, but as a more efficient approach to making a nice dining area, I'm going to build the dining table into the island, but not at the counter height, but rather at a better height for our dining table. So that's something I'm going to work on next. I've also brought some furniture in for a sitting area just to make sure I've got enough space. And also, as I work in the arrangement on this right wall here, that's where there's going to be a fireplace and a bookcase. And I've got some thoughts about how I want that to work. So I brought in a fireplace element that I'm going to incorporate into that end of the house. A couple of different issues that relate to that piece, and we'll see that as I work. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is simply do a live modeling session with this. So I won't be narrating, I won't be talking live. I will just simply do the SketchUp modeling, and then when I post the video, I'll speed the modeling up to double time, and I'll narrate over it. Okay, so I'll be back with that next. So I've started the live modeling session, and the first thing I'm going to do is push that island countertop back a foot. The island will have a 2x4 low wall built up to the underside of the counter, and the cabinets backed up against that. That'll provide a place to run wiring and put in a drain line for the sink and so forth, as well as to give a little bit of stability to the cabinets. So what am I doing? Oh yeah, and so the next thing I'm going to do here is look into the possibility of designing a built-in dining table. So it's going to be 6 inches lower than the countertop surface, about 30 inches off the floor rather than 36, which is typical for a kitchen counter. I've made it out of the same plywood material, bamboo plywood, that I'm going to be specifying for the cabinetry. But that plywood is available in, I think, a 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch thickness. I'm going to assume it has a 2x4 framework underneath it that would be hidden from view unless you get down on your hands and knees and look underneath. So I made the tabletop a good 2 inches thick to reflect the framing underneath. And here I am just changing the material of the cabinetry to the bamboo plywood to be consistent throughout. I had originally just made them maple without giving it really any thought. So I'm just going through and cleaning up the materials. I want to use a palette of bamboo for the cabinetry and possibly for the special window wall shop front windows that I'm going to be doing in the main living space. That table is going to need some kind of support at the outer edge. I haven't put that in yet, but I'll get around to that at some point. At least I've got it the right size. I made it big enough to comfortably seat 4, and then a bit of a squeeze for 6, because I figured that 6 people in this house, that's probably only going to be occasionally when there's more guests than residents. So that was how I based on the size of the table. And as far as what size to actually use, I think there are all kinds of online resources for that kind of stuff, but I think the best thing to do is keep a tape measure handy and measure what works for you around your own house. If you're enjoying this, please do remember to click that like button and subscribe while you're at it. I think there's a little bell there you can click on that'll get you notifications for when I put up the next episode. There are other ways I could arrange this table. I could arrange the whole thing at 90 degrees so that it's in line with the kitchen counter but offset. I may look into that as another possibility, but for now I need to move on to other things. There you go, there's your 6 chairs. Frank Lloyd Wright did a lot of built-in dining areas. If you're interested in that possibility, take a look at his Usonian house plans from the 30s and 40s and 50s. He did a lot of built-in dining. So I have a fireplace. I think this is a Heatilator model. Heatilator is one of the ones I use frequently, also Regency. And the Heatilator is a gas fireplace with, this one has two faces, which is what I thought would be most suitable for this room. I'm going to have a little window seat spot to perch and read a book, and I'm also going to have a built-in bookcase. And then the whole section is, that whole piece is intended to serve also as shear wall for that end wall that's of the living room, that kind of big open space in the living room. It needs some shear walls out there. And so I thought that would be a way to do it while giving it a functional purpose in terms of how people use the space. I didn't just want to stick a blank wall. It would have been disappointing. Kind of an anticlimax. This gives the room an architectural focus. There will be some kind of flat roof framing that will be supported on that wall. Possibly. I've not exactly centered it, but I've pulled it in away from both corners so that I can bring glass around the corners and keep the space more transparent and open. The room is 24 feet in its long dimension, front to back, which divides nicely into 3 8-foot sections. So I'm keeping that in the back of my head as far as how I'm going to do the roof framing, limited to an 8-foot span that way. And this is my first thoughts on framing the roof. I may have a series of 4 parallel beams, one at each outside wall and then 2 running down the middle of the space, 8 feet apart. with the rest of the roof spanning in the opposite direction. I'm not 100% sure about that yet. I'm just thinking about another possibility as well. Kind of have to do some sketching to figure out what works best. But I needed to get one of them into the model just to get started with seeing how things are going to look. I'd like to minimize the depth of those beams, but I also think it's fine to actually see them. They do give a kind of rhythm and structure to the space instead of just another flat white surface. Oh, and my furniture floating up in the air. Bring it back down to the floor there. There you go. So I can start to get a feel for the shape of the space there. There's the ceiling on it. Definitely want to have some kind of a plank ceiling, not a gypsum board ceiling. There may be gypsum underneath the plank in order for fire purposes, fireproofing purposes, but I want to have a wooden ceiling, tongue and groove, 3/4 inch. It's looking pretty good. Gonna put a little hearth there. Don't have a hearth, and that hearth will double as a little window seat, place to perch and read a book by the window. I'm not a big TV watcher, so I don't have lots of big screens in my house, but with the screen technology that they have today and with the gas fireplace, it is feasible to put one above the fireplace without damaging the equipment, without damaging the TV. So a large screen mounted above the fireplace is a possibility. It'd also be possible, instead of using 2x4 wall, to fur the wall out a little bit, make it 2x6. Might not even be necessary to do the furring, depending on the model TV you have. And then it could be recessed into the wall above the fireplace and a panel of some kind placed over it so that you don't have to look at a black screen when you're not watching TV. Here I am thinking about where the bookcase might go. Got to have at least one bookcase in this house. It's not a house if it doesn't have a bookcase and a cat. I'm going to try to limit the span of those beams to at most 24 feet. Less would be good. 24 feet is quite a span. They're probably going to need to be at least 14 inches deep. If I used a high-grade glue laminated beam, probably 14 inches deep. And that's considerable depth. I would rather they weren't quite as deep as that, but it's really hard. The alternative would be to put a couple of posts, incorporate a couple of posts into the design somewhere, and that's a challenge. They'd have to fit in somehow with the kitchen, and it's just not really, I don't see that working out right now. I may come back to that and see if there's a possibility. Then another option is to run the beams perpendicular to the direction I'm showing, and then I have to incorporate some posts front and back rather than side to side. And if I can find a way to do that elegantly with the shop front type window system I want to use, then maybe that's also possible. I'm going to be working on that next, so that'll either be in episode 3 or episode 4. This is episode 2 we're watching here. If you haven't already seen episode 1, I recommend that you do go back and take a look at it. I'll make sure there's a link in the description. The bookcase only needs to be a foot deep, whereas the alcove for the fireplace needs to be 2 feet. So I've got this 1 foot space behind the bookcase that's left over, and I haven't quite figured out if there's a good use for it. I could recess the bookcase a foot, but I don't like the idea of that, having it set back in. So I was wondering whether there might be some use for that 1 foot space on the outside of the house as part of a garden. Maybe there's a outdoor fireplace in the back or something. But for now, I'm just going to leave a void behind the bookcase 1 foot deep. And there is going to need to be some kind of framing at the corners. Again, I'm going to try to minimize it and work it into hiding it into the window wall so that it just looks like another window mullion. And this is not going to be permanent, but I'm just putting some markers every 4 feet to get a sense of the proportion for that window wall. I'm not going to bring the glass right down to the floor. That causes problems with, there's some code issues around that are kind of annoying that have to do with plugs, electric receptacles. Strictly speaking, you're not always allowed to put them in the floor, or if you do put them in the floor, they're not counted towards the ones you're required to have. So one workaround is not to have the glazing go right down to the floor, but instead to set it up about 8 inches from the floor so that there's about 8 inches around the floor at the bottom that is where you can run wiring and put plugs. It has the second advantage of making things just a little bit easier to waterproof, and you get less splashing on a rainy day. You get less splashing of mud up on the glass and stuff like that. That's where the window is going to go, in the book alcove, in the reading alcove. I definitely prefer the simpler look on the outside and not having that recess on the outside. In terms of how it looks, I really prefer that. And I don't think an outdoor fireplace is altogether appropriate for a small house like this. Maybe, but maybe not there. So that you can lean comfortably against the wall and not be right up against the glass, I thought it would be good to raise the sill above the seat in the reading nook. Looking good. That's the door that leads down to the master bedroom, window down there at the end. If it was like a single person or a retired couple living here, they could just leave their bedroom door open and they'd have a nice sight line right straight through to the window at the far end, keep things really nice and open that way. Then they only need to close their door when there's guests and they feel they need a little privacy. Nice to have more than one sitting area in case somebody wants to get away from the crowd. I also looked at the possibility of putting a piano in there, and I think a small grand piano would fit, a 6-foot grand. The smallest size grand piano could be tucked in the corner for a musical family. Furniture. There's my pianos. Pianos look right in this file. Something funny happened when I brought them into my model. I'm not sure what happened, but that's not important. You see that? They came into the model mirror image, and I didn't really even notice for the longest time. We've got a piano that's got all its keys reversed. I don't know why they came in mirror imaged, but anyway, I didn't keep them in there, so it doesn't really matter. SketchUp is funny. It's one of those things. You don't see it, you don't see it, you don't see it, and then once you see it, oh my God, you can't see anything else. That piano is backwards. Anyway, there is room. That piano is a 7-foot grand, and the black one next to it's a 6-foot.
And there's room enough for a 6 foot, for sure. This is a small house. I don't think that really the room is large enough to accommodate a 7 foot. That one came in reversed also for some reason. Easy enough to change that. I just didn't even notice at the time. Frank Lloyd Wright always included pianos in his house designs, even when his clients didn't even play the piano, he'd put pianos in their designs. There's getting a sense of the front here, beginning to get a feel for the proportions anyway, general composition. It'll look a whole lot nicer once I start putting some finished materials on it. I always structure my models with building structure separate from finishes, because when you dimension on working drawings, construction drawings, you dimension to the construction materials, the 2x4 framing, 2x6 framing. You don't dimension to the finished surfaces. The contractors, the framers, they need the dimensions to the framing. So I always make my models in two parts. One part is structure and the other part is finishes. So a wall, if it's framed with 2x6 studs, the wall is going to be 5.5 inches thick, the structural wall. And then outside of that, I'll put a second wall, basically, which is the finished material. It might consist of exterior insulation, plywood sheathing, hardwoods, wood siding, lap siding, stucco, whatever your finished materials are. That way I keep it all separate, and it's easier and more correct as far as dimensioning the construction drawings. That wraps things up for this session. In the next session, I'll be focusing on the window walls and the roof framing. I need to do a bit of sketching and thinking through how I want to do some of this roof framing, and that really fits tightly with how the window walls get worked out. So I'll be working on that in the next, and I hope you'll come back and watch that. Please do remember to click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I think you can also click a notifications bell, which will let you know when I come out with the next video. I hope to do that in the next day or two. Have a great day. Bye-bye.